Currently, within 100 Years Quest, we have a lot of different factions and events going on. Each of the Dragon Gods are their own faction, the Dragon Eaters are their own faction, but out of all of them, the one that I think is the most mysterious is the White Witch. I mean, we don't even have her name yet. I mean, she's got a lot going on in that whole aspect, but there are clues right now that I think we can possibly tie together to get something we know about her. So let me pull up the slideshow. I've gathered some information I think we can kind of look at, engage, and really kind of like look at it, essentially stuff that we know exists in Fairy Tail that we can look at. So right now, what can we know? We know that in the year X633, guilds were created. While like the whole guild system, all the wizards coming together and having some form of regulation over them. At the start, that was started by Eleftheria being the first wizard guild, and we know, like, interestingly enough, when it's year X633 when all this started, this opening from him saying that magic is an evil and whatnot, and right now in the story we're at what, X793, so 160 years later. What we know about Toka. In the official translations, Jalal says that, she's been doing this for 100 years. But I think we can gauge that it's not like she's exactly 100 years old, maybe just 100 years when people have been starting to notice stuff about her. But keep in mind, like, stuff like, oh, well, the guilds were, formed over 160 years ago. And, certain other events happened close to that time. We're going to talk about this. But also, like, when Eleftheria was saying, like, oh, magic wasn't evil, and all this stuff that's been going on, we see this village, like, in ruin, these people crucified and killed. And what do we know about, again, the White Witch? She's seemingly immortal, 100, I mean, it's going to go to 100 plus years. Maybe she was involved in this. This person who's saying magic isn't evil, we just need to kind of get things under control from Eleftheria, and the White Witch who's saying, well, magic isn't evil, but when it gets to a certain level, when it gathers to a certain extent, that it is, a problem, it is evil. And then using Zareth as an example of that. So we can kind of look at, well, maybe it ties into, let me move this over a little, maybe it ties into, oh, well, maybe it has something to do with the whole, like, events that led up to guilds being created. But another thing that we can kind of look at, not only that, is a little over 100 years from the current story. At the end of Fairy Tail Zero, we see a little bit of a laid out map of the years starting from year 686 when the Fairy Tail Guild was started. That what was it, like sometime between that well, no, because it was that year 686 April that the guild started, and then in July of that year the Second Caravan Trade War started. And so 686, 107 years prior to the current point in the story, the trade wars happened, and you had all these big wars between, all these different people wanting all this business. Obviously, guilds got involved. And, after that, when the, what was it, 2 years? No, 4 years. 4 years to the Second Trade War ended. And there was, the inter-guild ban where, they weren't allowed to go to, battle between official guilds. We know that from events of, like, the, fight between the Fairy Tail Guild and Phantom Lord. Like, they got into a lot of, trouble over that because they were breaking rules over, set between the guilds in general. So we can kind of, like, gauge, like, oh, well, maybe she's linked up to that, whereas she was caught in that war 100 plus years prior to the story, and you can kind of, like, look at that and say, well, that would explain why she's saying it's not magic that's evil, it's when it gets to a certain, like, gathering point, gets to a certain level of power, it starts to get dangerous. Because she says, like, when in chapter 46, 100 Years Quest, when she's talking to Natsu, that when he's like, magic isn't evil, and she's like, magic is a necessity. It in itself isn't evil. When it gets summed up enough, then it becomes a problem. Like, when she's saying, like, it's a necessity, it's like, yeah, there are certain aspects that, it applies that it's like, oh, yeah, you need that in life. Like, for tools and just normal day living. Like, we saw over in Edelus, like, they used magic for their lighting in their streets to light fires in their houses to keep them warm and stuff. Essentially, like, a lot of normal stuff like electricity, plumbing, and heating and whatnot. Oh yeah, that comes from magic. You can use it in various ways just to improve, like, your life and, living kind of, like, not expenses, kind of just, like, living matters. and say, oh, well, that is, something you could say, yeah, magic in general it can be used for. It's be like tools, and then, when eventually stuff gets out of hand, like when you get into like big wartime levels of power, that things get a little dangerous. Like when, for instance, obviously, like the Magic Council having something like Etheria under their belt, where they use it generally as a deterrent, but if they wanted to, they could just, let me see if I can snap real quick, if you can hear that. I'm not so good at snapping. If they wanted to, they could wipe out entire countries off of the planet. That's this giant orbital time-space, like, transcending magical, like, nuke cannon satellite weapon that, yeah, you could use that if you'd wanted to, similar to how when guilds gather up, they can cause a lot of destruction. I mean, look at Zareth. Zareth, for fun, started his own town that became an empire that spanned across an entire continent. And though it looks like for the continent they prospered and did really well, there's still the fact of like how much destruction had to go into that whole process, where it's like in the end it helped a lot, but you can still look at like the level of damage and the level of lives lost to eventually get up that. Or like, for instance, the trade war, where because of squabbles and issues between guilds, and different people and all this kind of like different kind of, again, trades. It's easy, literally called the Caravan Trade War. That conflict really started, and you had all these people that had to go to war and die over, something that should have been, yeah, we should be able to come to an agreement over this. But the White Witch's influence, I'm really intrigued to see where, like, the level that her kind of hands have reached, because she's, like, supposed to be, like, an opposing force to Zareth, and where Zareth was this just behemoth of power and influence, he was just this massive, like, legendary being, legend to some, infamous to others, like, this entity within the fairy tale world that, some people didn't even like to say the name Zareth because he was just so regarded in a lot of ways as like the ultimate black mage, the ultimate like blight on the history of wizards. Whereas I believe the White Witch is, hers is going to be much more of quiet, much more of like hand in the darkness, doing things without being noticed. Like I talked about, we could have had characters that were actually under her control throughout the history of the series since chapter 1, and we didn't know about it, and we find out it's like, well, why is this character so weird? It's like maybe Crawford and the like members of the council were so corrupt because they were influenced in certain ways by the White Witch. For instance, I've had this in the slideshow for a while, and I talk about it. Face was a tool that, if needed to be, could wipe out all magic on the entire continent. It was like the big all-in failsafe that the council had if something bad went down. Like, you'd be able to make it so people with magic, like if someone like, oh yeah, Albereth was going to invade, and it's like, well, Ethereon wasn't enough. They have to just erase all magic on the continent, and that way magic folk wouldn't be able to come there, because no magic providing to their body from the ether nano in the air would be bad for them, because we know that wizards in the fairy tale world, they rely on magic. It's not just like, oh yeah, I run out of magic, I'm a normal guy again. Their bodies are literally dependent on magic, so without it, they can actually get sick and die. And it would make sense of why, if like related to, like, imagine that if the White Witch had her hands in the council the whole time, and she's like where Face came from, and she's just setting up a bunch of things throughout it. Like, it would make sense because we know her magic. Like, what she's done so far is she can just like sap people, like drain their magic and then take control of them. I mean, she's probably got more magic under her belt, but that seems to be her whole kind of like base set. It's like, oh yeah, drain. And as well as like when you look at like Zareth being somebody that was like a threat to her, not only in his like immortality, his grasp on magic, black magic in general, but obviously with his Aetherius and them having curse power, it would make sense of like why she also wouldn't mess with him, and why she wouldn't just be like, oh yeah, bam, face go off. It's like, well, then that's just going to make it easier for Zareth to go about and do his things, like, in her mind. And obviously Zareth wasn't straight like in with Tartaros, and they were doing their own thing to lead up to Zareth. leaving everybody without magic would just have been so much easier for Tartarus to really go about their stuff, because it's like, oh well, some of us can use magic, but it doesn't really matter because we're primarily curse power. So and now anybody that had a chance of being a resistant force to us now is just like, sickly and dying. So we're just gonna run through them really fast. There's a lot of ways that the White Witch can really kind of like link aspects of the story together. Like I said, like she could have been somehow influenced by the events that led up to the guilds, 160 years prior, or just over 107 years prior at the Caravan Trade Wars, when all these people started to get a little bit too full of themselves, having all these wars, pulling wizards into them as well. That, maybe she was linked up to that, or, that maybe have like set up her life. Because we know when Nazi's talking to her and he's like, why did you pick a cat to be your body? We don't know why she needs a body. I'm guessing that's how she's immortal. It's not like Zareth, who has the curse of contradiction, Ankh-Saram giving him an immortal body. Hers, seemingly body hopping to be able to like live through them and in their lifespans. So it's gonna be like, well, not just that, but when Nazi's talking to her, she kind of has this like solemn look, about it. So there's probably gonna be some meaning. Maybe like, at the start she was just some happy girl, just living life, her family, has her cat, and then because of stuff like either events from guilds, let's like wizards being unchecked, that led to her death. Like if she was literally in that village that Elefsere came upon that was like on fire and everyone dead, or if she was, swept up in the trade wars, that, she could have just been not like, oh, I was involved in this, but she was just like, just a kid that was just living a life and was really screwed over in all this. It would be really interesting to see how that kind of ties together. But right now, we don't really have anything about her. We just have, certain like little breadcrumbs, little Easter eggs that we can look at and really kind of formulate theories on. Well, like I'm using here. Events we know in the story. The Caravan Trade War. Events that led up to the creation of the Wizard Guild system. Face. All these things that we can say, oh, well, maybe, this is going to be what she's related to. Maybe this is going to be somehow tying her story of her character into, like, the world itself. I'm really hoping that it's not just, her backstory, but also how, this ties into events in the story that's already there. Because then it also expands upon stuff that exists within the fairy tale world, on top of just, adding a whole new character's backstory to things. My cat's getting all right up against the mic right near the end of this video. Okay, you lay down. But other than that, give me your theories on this. Like, I'm very much looking forward to the White Witch. Like each of the dragon gods are their own thing, which is going to be really fun. There's a lot of mystery in the Diablos, like I said, in the origin of 5th generation dragon slayers and whatnot, and what their role in the story is. But the White Witch, the fact that she's just like this mysterious force that has been, doing stuff in the shadows, I have a lot of like intriguing things about her, because I think we can kind of gauge aspects about the dragon gods and really kind of like get an idea about them just from like some of the stuff we have. Like we can look at like Ignia and guess, it seems like he might have some, pent up feelings about his father. Selene, we can look at like some of the stuff we know about like, the moon dragons and whatnot, the moon itself in fairy tale. Vierness, like I did a whole theory of like, well, he's like a secret, very extra hidden gold dragon. Maybe like his whole thing is going to be themed kind of like El Dorado, because like not only that, like his name is Spanish, so maybe he's going to have something like the Golden City of El Dorado into his whole thing. We can look at stuff and be like formulate ideas that might come about for them. But the White Witch in general, I think, has the most potential mysterious. I'm messing up that word. Literally, I'm correcting myself on that word. Mysterious aspects to her that will not only add to her as a character, but flesh out earlier stuff. Like I said, if she was somehow tied to the Caravan Trade Wars or Face, that would be really cool, because then it would just be like, if you go and reread stuff and it'd be like, this happened because of her, this now. I think it'd be really cool and expansive into the overall world, and it would just open up an extra door knowing where some of this came from and where some of this ends up leading to. Kind of like when we found out like with Kagura, and found out like Kagura's motivations came from, Simon's death that, happened all the way back in the Tower of Heaven. But other than that, like I said, comment below, tell me your thoughts are on all this, and I really appreciate thumbs up the video, but friend the like button and the subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But other than that, I appreciate everyone who's already subscribed, and I thank you all for listening. Bye.